We want
to
to
tell you a story.
We went to Mass in my house when I was young, but I felt like it was more of an obligation, not a relationship. I was told what to believe, and so I did. But when I was in 5th grade, my mom and I, and a mom and a friend that she had at work who invited her to church. And it was a very different kind of church than what I was used to. We sang songs at the beginning of the service, and then they had kids' church, and I went to that. And that's where I learned about love, I learned about sin, I learned about forgiveness, Jesus, and the Bible. My mom and I both started learning about faith in Jesus for the first time.
I know the world is broken. I've spent some time in the brokenness myself. I grew up in a house that knew and loved Jesus, but my life has not been one that anyone would describe as perfect. I've still made many poor choices along the way, and because of my past, I have always had compassion for other girls who've made bad choices too.
Once I hit high school, I traded Jesus for rebellion. I didn't want to be at home. I couldn't focus on my studies. I often skipped school, and I found many friends whose influence pulled me away from church. At 14 years old, I started drinking for fun. Then I quickly found what I thought was love. I had sex for the first time, and I loved being the wild child. But then everything changed. The day after Father's Day, my father died unexpectedly in a work accident. He was 41 years old, and I was devastated.
My mom and dad got divorced when I was 2 years old. I lived with my mom in a small town on the East Coast, and then I became my dad's weekend warrior. Later, my mom remarried, had my younger brother, and we moved to Florida when I was in middle school. This was her dream, Florida, a house with a pool close to the beach. But it was my nightmare. She tore me from my friends, my father, and my grandparents, and moved us to a foreign land with him being my stepdad.
The trauma from the death of my father was very hard for me to process. I finished high school and went to college, and I knew Jesus. However, in my newfound freedoms, I found it much easier to find my comfort in something other than him, which led to more sex, more alcohol, and more drugs. Toxic relationships and a complete downward spiral. I quickly found myself in an unplanned pregnancy and immediately chose to have an abortion. I chose me.
When I was a teenager, I didn't always hang out with a good crowd. I had some bad friends, and I had some bad boyfriends. I even got pregnant. But at the time, I didn't know there was any help for me, even though I grew up right down the road from the pregnancy center. I was scared, and I didn't choose life back then. I turned away from God, and instead, I pursued worldly desires in those years that followed.
After we moved to Florida, we eventually found a church, and my connection with the youth group was my lifeline. Because at home, things were getting out of control. My mom worked second shift so she and my stepdad could share the raising of my brother. However, my stepdad rarely came home. And when he did, he was late, drunk, and very hard to get along with. This quickly caused chaos in our home. I became my brother's afternoon and overnight guardian and had to deal with my stepdad's addiction to alcohol. He became out of control, abusive physically and verbally, and soon the police were making frequent check-ins at my house, either because the neighbors were calling them or because I called them myself. I couldn't wait to go to college, but when I was 20 years old, I got into a relationship with a boy who was a mess, and I found myself in my own toxic relationship. I got pregnant, and I was scared.
After my abortion, I thought all my problems were solved. I lied to myself. The day I got home from the procedure, the father of the baby, who did not want me to get an abortion, screamed outside my door because of my decision. He cried. It was horrible. I felt guilty. I felt dirty, unloved, and more than a failure. I ran further from Jesus and got deeper into the party scene. And as you can imagine, I burned a lot of bridges with my family, my mother, even with God. I felt like he could never forgive me.
I knew this wasn't how it was supposed to go. I was raised as a Christian who did not believe in abortion. I had even spoken about abortion being wrong. And now I was faced with a decision. These were my thoughts. I need to finish school. I cannot be pregnant and unmarried. And I was not ready to give up my future and my life. So I chose to terminate my pregnancy.
Before I knew it, I didn't even recognize myself in the mirror. The decision to have the abortion started to affect all my decisions. It wasn't long before I was in a new toxic relationship, and this time it was with a woman. I thought she would help me bury all my pain, and I didn't want to ever have a relationship with a man again. I didn't want to get pregnant again. I just wanted to be loved. But things only got darker in my life. We were both addicts, and our drug of choice was heroin. So we worked at the local strip club to support our $300 a day habit. I was living a nightmare. I didn't know how I'd gotten there. I used to be a girl who went to church every Sunday and Wednesday. I carried my Bible to school. I was part of a Bible club. And now I was praying that God would get me high one more time, because my addiction was so bad I needed to get high to think of a way out. I was so lost.
It wasn't until I was 23 that I decided to come back to Jesus. I started going back to church, and it was there that I learned about the Walk for Life, which raises money to help save babies. And I just had to get involved. I didn't want others to make the same choice that I did. I also met my husband at this same church. We ended up conceiving, and my baby was born the next fall. But I continued to volunteer because I wanted to be a force for good. It wasn't long before I decided to come on staff at New Life Solutions. I chose purpose.
My mom was always faithful to pray for me during this time. I got my life back together, and shortly after, I got married. We talked about having a baby. Then, when I found out I was pregnant again, my first thought was, I need to have an abortion. What? I was in my office telling my coworker, I can't do this. I have to go have an abortion. Where did that thought come from? I now know that Satan is a liar. We were trying to get pregnant, and yet my first thought was to do this again. At that moment, I came to realize that this life is a spiritual battle, and I could not do this on my own.
Eventually, everything came to a head, and I know now that a lot of people were praying for me. And so I decided to get clean, and through all those people praying, I accepted that I had a lot of work to do personally, and it literally took me one day at a time. But thankfully, my mother let me move home. And it took a while for her to trust me, but she always loved me. And so thankfully, I was just so thankful for God's never-ending love. His word, the Bible, truly guided me out of my pit of hell. God forgave me, got a hold of my heart. I got married, finally started living sold out for Jesus, and started working actually for my local church.
Even though I was trying to make better decisions, things were still pretty rocky in my personal life. I still hadn't dealt with my abortion loss, and I was struggling to bond with my newborn because of it. On top of that, the husband that I met at church was addicted to drugs, had fallen away from God, and he refused to get help. So by my late 20s, I ended up divorced with a toddler. You see, I had just begun working for this ministry that values family, and mine had been broken. My life mirrored so many of those women who we serve, and I realized that I had a pattern of relationships with the wrong people. I knew I needed to break that cycle for good, and I needed to heal.
But I still felt too ashamed to talk about my past abortion. It was information about me that could only be trusted with a select few and behind closed doors. Even after everything I'd been delivered from, I still carried that weight. The breakthrough came when I was introduced to Passages of Hope, an abortion grief recovery group. I was resistant initially, but I agreed to join the group, and I'm so grateful that I did because it gave me a safe place to finally talk about my abortion out loud. It was where I learned how to forgive myself and move past all that shame.
I knew I couldn't do this on my own, so I reached out for help. I became a client at the local pregnancy center, and thankfully this time, I chose life.
Thank God for the people at New Life Solutions that I eventually called family. Right away, they encouraged me to go to Passages. They helped me embrace God's grace for me and fully submit my ways to Him. My relationship with Christ became the one that I could trust the most. I knew that He could never steer me wrong or disappoint me, and He would never leave me broken.
I truly cherish all the support I received from a Women's Place medical clinic. They became a safe place for me to process, and they empowered me to be a mom. I took advantage of every resource they offered. I took every class I could, and I gladly accepted whatever diapers or clothing they were willing to give me. And I left each visit feeling a little more prepared. By the time my son was born, I was as ready as I could be. And I was so thankful that they were there for me.
Thanks to Passages of Hope, I was finally set free. And now I confidently share my testimony because I can boast in Christ, because I know His grace is sufficient for me, for you too.
Now my son is the joy of my life, most days. And that is a choice I wouldn't change for the world.
You know, if it wasn't for New Life Solutions, I honestly don't know what my life would look like. I'm scared that I might have repeated the same pattern I did when I was young and ashamed and ran from God. But they cared for me, they loved me, and they pointed me back to Jesus so He could make me whole. I remember when I first started working for a pro-life ministry, I thought I was going to change the world, but little did I know how it was going to change me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening and being with us tonight. Our ministry, New Life Solutions, is filled with so many stories, both of men and women, whether it's a Women's Place medical clinic or Passages of Hope, abortion, grief, and recovery, or even in the halls and walls of New Life Solutions. Here at New Life Solutions, our mission is to protect the unborn, share the gospel, and to transform our communities, one life at a time. I represent one of those lives. These 3 stories you heard are actually 3 parts of one story. This story is mine. Thank you, ladies. This ministry changed my life. My name is Crystal Attinger, and I'm grateful that my story continues to be written as a staff member of New Life Solutions. As I look to the future of our ministry, I'm filled with excitement. I'm dreaming, planning, and working to ensure that we provide free services for our clients so they hear hope. You see, my story is not unique. The clients who walk through our doors each and every day are faced with the same struggles, the same difficulties, and the same traumas. The only difference is they might not have a praying mom like I did. That ugly crying, getting on your knees, praying mom that I still have. But they do have all of us. We're here tonight because we want to be part of their stories. There are people in this room tonight that donated over 18 years ago, helping me choose life for my son. You also made donations the years following for me to be able to go through passages of hope, for me to live forgiven and set free. Those of you who gave just last year, there's students that stories have been changed because of the More to Life Youth Development Program. We were able to share stories like mine to help students choose a path to purity and to avoid risky sexual behaviors, potentially changing the course of their life forever. As I welcome Charles DeMarco back up here, I want to repeat our scripture theme for the evening. Psalms 107:2. Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story, those he redeemed from the hand of the foe. I am so happy to be living redeemed. Thank you for letting me share my story.